All right, we're here at my Vermi Hut indoor worm bin, and today we're gonna harvest the oldest tray, which has been in the system for 176 days. But first, we're gonna check on this top tray that we just put up here 8 days ago and fed for the first time. And right here is where we fed, I believe, and I can see an indention right here. And we're gonna see how they did. Did that raise the worms up from the bottom trays? And then we're also going to start another Cocoon Nursery with the harvested castings that we get from the tray that's a couple trays underneath this. And we're gonna do that after here, so make sure you stay tuned. All right, so I'm seeing lots of bits of castings all on the top here, and we did feed with oats on the top last time, and oh my gosh, I've definitely found the feeding zone, and absolutely the worms have come up from the bottom trays. Check that out. Tons of worms all throughout here. Let's keep invading the previous feeding zone and see. I'm just gonna dig all the way out and let's see what they did with it. Oh yeah, check that out. Just absolutely tons of worms. Look at that. Look at that. And I think they're probably in a banana. This is like a mini worm ball right here. Whoa. Yeah, I think right here is a banana peel maybe, or maybe this is the potato peels. But anyway, whatever it is, they have really gathered the worms all around it. Fantastic. And this looks like, I think I might have put some broccoli stalk in here, and they have eaten out the inside of the broccoli stalk, and what they've left is the fibers. That is so cool. And these are pretty stiff fibers right here. That is so awesome. I love to see how they, go after each different food and what they eat first and leave. Eventually they'll eat everything. And this right here, I believe is a carrot. And they have really taken apart the edges. They're definitely going after it and actually burrowed right through the center. That's pretty cool. And again, worm balls everywhere. So wow, they've come up here. This is pretty good. And by no means do I think every worm is up here. In fact, this may be just half of the worms. They're still trying to figure out this top tray that we put in here. And what I'm gonna do is just kind of fluff every part of it, because when we put this in as an inoculating tray a long time ago, we filled it all the way to the top with shredded cardboard and some paper. And when it had been sitting underneath the other trays, it kind of got matted down. So last video, we fluffed it up and it got a little bit higher than when it was matted. But what we're gonna do is every time we feed, we're gonna add more and more bedding. And I'm also gonna continue to fluff it up as we go. And look at that, this is where we put the feeding zone. And just tons of worms. Again, we'll fluff up this side and then we will start our feeding. And oh wow, for some reason, they like corners. Check this out. Ton of worms right from the corner. I'm not sure why that is, if they like to bump against the edges, but for some reason, the worms, I always find them close to the edge and particularly in the corners. Let me know if you find the same thing in your bins. And if you like this video so far, I appreciate you hitting the like button. So let's go ahead and set up our feeding zone. Real quick before I start feeding, I want to point out something right here. These holes are about 1/4 inch, and that's how the worms get up and down. And you can see this worm right here is going down to the bottom layer. And this right here is a little preview of how I harvest and why it is so effective when I do harvest my castings out. So that's coming up later in the video. All right, first things first, with every feeding, I add a little bit of cardboard shredding. And that's because the worms eat both the browns and the greens, and they need them, and you need them for your garden in order to make a great compost. And here's what we had in mind to feed. I've got a bunch of kale from my garden. We've got a banana peel for them, and then we've got some slower to eat foods like apples and quicker to eat foods like strawberries. And these also were all grown in my garden. So let's go ahead and put this feeding in. All right, we'll start off with some of the kale, and putting down that dry bedding is also a cool little trick, because as you put in all this food scraps, it releases its moisture, and that moisture goes somewhere. So might as well let it get into the bedding and help keep the bin at a uniform moisture. And of course, with these worm towers, if you do have too much moisture in them, then they will just release them down through those holes into the basin, or in my case, down into a dry inoculating tray that is underneath all these bins. So keep adding the apples. Got a little carrot top, and again, from my garden. The worms, as you saw, seem to love them. I think they have pretty high sugar content. And then let's just put the last bit in here. And we had a jumper. The next food I've been putting in is dry oats, and that's because I went in my pantry and cleaned it out, and I found some whole oats that were 4 years expired. So I've been pulverizing those and adding them into my feedings. And the last kind of little bit of food that I put in is coffee and tea grounds. And again, they're really good for feeding your worms because they are, by nature of being grounded, in very small pieces. And then finally, I add some pulverized eggshells for grit. And this is also good for the garden, so I don't mind putting extra in here, and the worms seem to spread it around no problem. So we're gonna bury this up and kind of button it up, and what we're gonna do is bring what I call the pre-harvest tray up to the top. And that is a tray that had been underneath the previous feeding tray for about 60 days. And it itself had been a feeding tray. What was happening at that time were the worms were just getting every last piece of food scrap and bedding and consuming it and making really good castings. So it is time to harvest that tray, and we're gonna do that right after we finish up here. Now, since it worked out so good the last time, we're gonna add oats to the top. If you notice, when I took the lid off and pulled up the newspaper, there were no oats on the top. So they have had no problem coming up here and feasting on these oats. All right, so we'll add this newspaper, and then we will get to the harvesting. And the executive producer made a fantastic point, which is if I'm going to harvest that tray down into this one, I probably don't want the newspaper right here. So I'm gonna take it off. Thank God I have an executive producer to help me out. And the executive producer had another great point, which is I just put all these oats on here, and when I put a tray on top, it might stick to it. So I'm just gonna kind of rough this up a little bit so that I don't have just plain oats sticking to the bottom of the tray that I'm about to harvest. Again, more points for the executive producer. She is awesome. All right, so we have put our pre-harvest tray on the top to be harvested, and you can see the cross stitch pattern here from the previous trays being on top of it. And what we're gonna do is we are just gonna kind of fluff this up and agitate it. And you can see there's worms all in here taking care of business, making sure the last little pieces are taken care of. And I am seeing just a few little pieces. That's okay, we can get those out, or they can feed the Cocoon Nursery. So what I'm doing is I'm just agitating the bin here. And what that's gonna do is kind of make the worms flee. And they have one way to go, and that is down, because I've got light on top. I may even put a little fan, kind of blow on the top, but they're gonna make their way down below into the tray below there, and that was the feeding tray that you just saw me feed. So let me go ahead and finish fluffing this up. Now this tray has been on the system for 176 days, and 40 of those were as an inoculating tray. So I guess the way to think about it is this tray has been active for about 136 days. And what I'm just kind of pulling out there was a peach seed, and then it looked like some kind of maybe a tomato skin or something like that. So let me kind of continue to agitate here. And with all these castings that come out, we're gonna put these into a container that's gonna be the Cocoon Nursery. So here we go. This has been about a little bit over a minute, and I'm just gonna let this thing rest for about 15 minutes, let them kind of make their way down. All right, so it has been 15 minutes since we were in here last, and what I'm gonna do is just continue to agitate to hopefully get more of the worms down. I can see that there is less worms. I still see some, but there are less worms than we first jumped in here, so hopefully this agitation is getting them to decide down below is a better space for them than up here. All right, so hopefully that helps them to not be happy with me and helps them to continue to dive down and go into our top feeding tray, which is right below this one. So we're gonna let this go for another 15 minutes, and then I'll come back in here and do another agitation. All right, this time I only went 10 minutes in between agitations, so let's see if we see even less worms in here. And I think that's what we're seeing. I'm seeing a couple, 3 or 4. So it's working. They're slowly going down there. Let's make sure I get the edges so that they're not hiding out right there. but they're definitely not liking what I'm doing, and they are moving, so that's good. Let's just kind of keep agitating and moving these castings around, letting them know, even though it's nice and wet and moist, and they were happy before, that this is not the time to stick around. So there we go. This is our third agitation. So let's keep going to see how many more it takes, and I think, well, we'll go back to 15 minutes, I think, and we'll see how that does. All right, let's see how many more fled down there. Finding a couple here and there. Gone down more. Now this is one of our thicker amounts of castings that we've produced in these trays. So I'm wondering if, because they're just a little bit thicker, worms are taking just a little bit longer to get down there, because they can find a space in between the top and the bottom that they might be comfortable with. But we're just gonna do this agitation, and I'll do one more agitation, and then as I look through that, I will probably just kind of pick out some worms, and then we will start our cocoon nursery with all of these castings. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so I think we're done with our agitations, and what we're gonna do is any worms that we find, we'll put them in here with the stuff that I had picked out of here, and it looks like we're doing pretty good. Looks like most of them have gone under. And all throughout these castings, there are just tons of cocoons. And what a cocoon nursery does is it just lets these castings sit and lets the worms that are in those cocoons hatch out and kind of start their first little eating. And while that's happening, we'll put a little bit of food in there to bait out any of those brand new babies that are showing up. And then after about 60 days, we will take all those worms that we found and we'll put them back in this vermi hut. And then those castings will be ready to use in the garden or to go into the storage. Let me just get the rest of the worms out here, and then we will take this off and release all of this stuff back into the top feeding tray. All right, so I'm going to release these into the tray that's just below here, which is the one we just fed. And all the castings that are in here are gonna go into this cocoon nursery. So I'm not gonna bore you with all that, but all of this castings will go in here and we'll start a cocoon nursery, and I'll show you how that goes on our next video. So I hope everybody's having a great day. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and happy vermicomposting, everybody. Take care now.